Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from here on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. And I'd just like to say you better be prepared to you might get a little bit of a shocker with today's episode. Okay, but before we begin, I'd like to encourage people, if you're listening to this on YouTube later, or any other video station, please subscribe to my site, and that'll keep you updated on new shows coming up in the future that you might not be available to listen to live. Also, hey, if you're into some somewhat disturbing but very thought-provoking dystopian literature, check out my latest novel, The Destiny of Our Past, and you can find that on Amazon. Anyway, I said it was going to be a little bit disturbing. Well, yeah, it is. Because, you see, I've said that I've dealt with, I should say, the topic of psychopaths on quite a few shows. Now, of course, that deals obviously with a lot of my writings and so forth. But, I just have to say this. The number one reason why you should understand how a psychopath thinks is that you cannot understand society today if you don't understand how psychopaths think. And that's really hard for most people because 98% of the population generally has no clue as to how a psychopath really thinks because they're not psychopaths. Now, I'm not saying I am a psychopath. I'm just saying that if you study psychopathy and you learn the differences between how perception takes place between a psychopath and a non-psychopath, then you understand a great deal about what's going on in the world today. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on 4 primary areas of, our everyday lives. Okay? What affects us? And then I'm going to show how these areas are influenced, or even to a large degree, dominated by psychopathic thinking. Okay, now, just as a disclaimer, I don't think, for instance, that all politicians are psychopaths. There may be even some who don't even come into the category of secondary psychopaths. People that are very high in the traits, but they're not quite at that clinical level where you could say, you've got a diagnosis. But I will say that the most effective ones probably are. And so that's why it's very important to understand how they actually do think in order to see what's going on and how you can better shield yourself from the influences. Now, the 4 areas I'm going to deal with obviously are politics, but I'm also going to deal with religion. That's right. One of the top 10 occupations that attract psychopaths is clergy. Okay? So, it's not to say that your minister or pastor or rabbi or priest or bishop or imam is a psychopath. But it's also not saying that they aren't. Okay? And I have in the past actually commented that I think that there's a good possibility that some of the prophets that we revere in, like the Old Testament, could very well have been psychopathic. Obviously, God does use people, for his means that can get the job done. So it might be that some of them were psychopaths. Now, not there's probably some religious people going, this is bunk, forget it. Hear me out when I get back to this category, all right? Because there is a lot to be said for the strengths of psychopathic people. They do have certain advantages over non-psychopaths. But again, we have to realize that within, if you had 100 psychopaths, you might have, I don't know, maybe 20 of them that were highly ethical. All right? And that's just a made-up figure. But still, there are those that are highly ethical and those that are highly unethical. But just like a weapon, if you give a military-style weapon to someone who doesn't know how to use it, it still has the power behind it. And that's the same way with psychopathic people, or non-psychopaths for that matter. And I will say this. I personally, and I'll get back to this too, I personally think that super empathetic people are in many ways more dangerous than psychopaths. All right? A psychopath might roll over you to gain a goal. A highly empathetic person might roll over you to achieve a higher ideal. All right? But I think that ultimately maybe a lot of the people who were responsible for some very nasty things in places like the USSR, when Russia was dominated by communism, many of them could have been extremely motivated by high empathy, just like many times the militant left is perhaps highly made up of people that were very highly empathetic, trying to change the world, and then they suddenly see that there's people that disagree with them, and therefore they have to silence them. So anyway, let's continue here. First I said politics, and I said religion, marketing, and finally social change agents. You see, that's a category most people don't think about. Social change agents. Many of these people get into non-government organizations, NGOs, which is what a lot of people call them nowadays. And of course, that also includes foundations and think tanks and so forth, whose aim is to influence the culture. Okay? Again, most people don't think about these people, but they have had such an impact on American culture, you would not believe it. Okay? And I've actually, in my training, when I was getting my master's degree, I dealt with a lot of these kinds of people, where we would discuss the various issues and so forth that were goals that they had, areas they wanted to achieve within the society. And, they give you a lot of really, really good information on how to do that. Okay? So anyway, let's go ahead and get into why I think that in many ways psychopathic people wind up at the top, but at the same time why they're so effective and why you need to know how they think. Okay, first of all, let's just think about the idea that I just proposed. How do they think? We've dealt with this before, but I'm going to go over a little bit more to summarize it. Well, what really, there's a whole bunch of categories where psychopaths and non-psychopaths think differently. But one area that is very important is a sense of grandiosity, meaning that the psychopathic person is very much feeling like they're superior, that there's a goal that they're shooting for, that they are the center of the universe. And with that particular mindset, there is a sense of, basically that they're in control. And they may not be in control, but they are going to seek to be in control. They're going to really strive for that kind of domination. And so that sense of grandiosity is really, that sense of arrogance is really going to be a major component within how they think and how they act. Now, the second area is a lack of guilt. So a psychopath is much more likely to be able to employ strategies to gain ends and not really feel bad about it. Now, that doesn't mean they're necessarily evil people, but if they don't have a sense that they should feel guilty for manipulating you, that is obviously going to equip them with some extra advantages over people who are going to always be second guessing themselves. Like, is this the right thing to do? Should I be doing this? Is this really something that fits into a moral or ethical way of reasoning? Psychopaths don't bother with that, really. I mean, they can have a set of morals and ethics, but it's going to be much more pliable than the person who is non-psychopathic. There is no or very little empathy. Okay, so the psychopath is very much able to accomplish goals and not really lose any sleep over achieving those goals. Okay? If you've ever sat in bed and you've accomplished something, you've won something, maybe you were in a competition where you got first prize, and you were sitting there in bed and you were thinking, my gosh, I really feel sorry for the people that lost. I mean, they put up a good effort and so forth, and I feel good about winning, but I wish that the others could have won something too. A psychopath doesn't think that way. The psychopath is going to be thinking to themselves, I won, I deserved it, and the ones didn't make it, well, tough for them. Okay, that is how they're going to think, by and large. So those are and also I should get back to that. There is a very strong narcissistic component within psychopaths. I've said before, all psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths. And so there is going to be a sense of, look at me, I'm the center of the universe, and I want attention, for the wonderful things that I'm doing out there. So, just looking at those aspects without going into too much more detail. Well, wait a minute, there is one more detail I really should use. And one of the criteria that is often looked at when making a diagnosis is the sense of lying, or I should say twisting the truth. I think the really hardcore psychopath who really is not high up in the society or has a lower intelligence is going to just give you blatant lies. And they're going to be very convincing doing it. Whereas the ones that make it higher up realize that, you can get caught in a blatant lie. It can get you in trouble. So, get a little creative with the truth. Those, I did not have sex with that woman, Monica Lewinsky. That kind of reasoning where you can say something that is technically true, but it's not really the truth. Okay? So that's one of those things there. So about 5 traits there that we've dealt with. So let's go back to what I was saying here. I know that the most controversial thing category that I've listed is religion. So let's not deal with religion first. Let's deal with religion first. I'm sorry. Okay. So how could knowing how psychopaths think give us an idea of how religion operates? Well, let me give you a really good example here that I think can give us insights into where our society has been going, and that is guy. Excuse me, you hear some little crunching in the background. My retriever is deciding that she wants to sit here next to me while I'm recording. That's okay. So anyway, there's nothing wrong with your reception. So anyway, the thing is that you've probably noticed that religion, has really taken a big change in recent years, at least in the West, and at least with Christianity, where what could have gotten you in trouble with your religion for saying or doing or practicing back, let's say, in the 1960s, is now something that many high-up people in religion are kind of going, well, it's not so bad. And you're wondering, well, how can you have such a change? How can you have such a change in such a short period of time? Were people in those days wrong, or are people today wrong? Well, let me just say this. If your goal is to have the praise of the world, if your goal is to have the biggest church, if your goal is to have a position of influence to where the media likes you, or the politicians have you to state dinners and that sort of thing, well, you're going to say the things that are going to be pleasing to the society at the time. So, if you get these really, really important people at very high positions who suddenly start compromising, and so forth on the Bible, then maybe it's not because they've become more enlightened in some way. It might be that they have decided that this is what will get them their associated goals. Maybe they're willing to make compromises in some areas in order to gain in others. And so, basically, what I'm saying is that, it's not really that much of a difference. If you study history, you find that archbishops and popes and from Protestantism and Catholicism, that they were more than willing to go along with what some king said in order to get fame, fortune, money, position, influence, and those sorts of things. I mean, nothing's really changed. So maybe it's because the ones that wind up in these high positions are high in the psychopathic traits. Or maybe they are actually psychopaths. And, at the same time, in fairness, I did say, there were men of God who, in the Old Testament, prophets, who did things that might seem somewhat psychopathic. And maybe they were psychopathic, but they also could have been feeling that, hey, God's telling me to do this, I'll go do it. Sometimes a prophet had to be kind of a gunslinger, to get something accomplished in the society. But that could at least explain why it seems that you hear these pronouncements that just don't make sense anymore. When you're going, well, wait a minute, what's changed? Did the Bible get rewritten? Who knows? Now, I've just centered on Christianity. I'm sure you can find instances of this in all the major religions easily, of how this can have major influence. So anyway, religion. Well, let's deal with marketing. Marketing. If you're in politics, you might feel, you'd think that a person would feel bad about starting a war or doing something like that, where they would be just like agonizing over over what's happened, all the people hurt and so forth. Marketing, you usually don't have, if you're a marketer, you're not usually a person who's responsible for a war. Now, of course, there is the exception of now when the government, and I think they've been doing this since the early 1990s, enlisting marketers in order to sell wars and so forth, to persuade the people that, hey, well, instead of just, in America, for instance, you just don't go to war. You have to make people feel like that they want to go to war, so they'll support you in office. And that's why they've been employing marketers for doing that sort of thing. But let's just think of examples where you're selling food that is not really good for people. You're selling products that are not really all that desirable, be they damaging to people's health, the environment, their social well-being, all these kinds of things. But as a marketer, your goal is to get people to buy products. So now in that sense, you're a gunslinger without a gun, obviously, but your tools are your knowledge of media, how to analyze even social media to sell something, and then aiming at your target to get them to do something. I think one of the best examples of this actually is when marketers will actually employ what's known as the nag factor, in which they will aim their messages at little kids. All right? And those little kids are supposed to hear this, and they go, oh my gosh, this is such a desirable product, I really need to have this. And so they go to mom and dad and like, oh, I want this, 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 I want this. And then finally the parents just give in, sure, here it is. And they go out and spend their hard-earned cash on this, and then the kid plays with it for like a day, and it's like, okay, well, that's boring. And they don't want it anymore. Okay? But the marketer doesn't feel any guilt over that. The good marketer, the one that's going to actually sell the product, the one that's going to really get that product off the shelves, if they're psychopaths, they're going to be very good at what they do. And so there's not going to be a sense of, oh my gosh, I've done the wrong thing, I'm sorry. No, there is no sorry involved in it. They're doing their job. And therefore, you have to understand then the way our society propels when it comes to consumerism. When you turn on, especially around Christmas time, oh my gosh, where it's just like a heavy bombardment of ads. And of course, if you're trying to sell a product and you don't just do everything in your power to sell it, then you're going to be bankrupt. You're going to go out of business. The workers that are making the stuff are not going to have a job. So you have to sell the product. But at the same time, if you understand that the marketer is who they are they're not caring about you. Okay? They're not trying to sell you something to make your life any better than it is today. They don't care. They just want you to bring that product up to the cashier, get it scanned, pay the money, and have you walk out of the store. Their job is done. And so, ultimately, I think it's a very good idea that parents teach their children how marketing works. And also understand that psychopathy, be the marketer a psychopath or someone who just kind of is someone that just kind of adopts those traits, so they behave like a psychopath, even though they may feel guilty about it afterwards, but they're still doing it. Well, that's what you have to know. You need to understand, because when you turn that TV on and there's those ads, television itself is a neutral tool, but it's used by people that are trying to change you, which then gets me to that whole thing about social change agents. You can sell anything to anyone. Okay? And with social change agents, I've thought about this. You could arguably, my dad used to say that you could just basically sugarcoat rabbit droppings and tell people with advertising that it will do something good for them, and they would take it. They would go ahead and consume those rabbit droppings if they were told by advertisers that it would work. I guess it would have maybe a placebo effect. I don't know. But social change agents, I think, in some ways are worse than marketers. Because the marketer is just trying to get you to buy a product. Okay? They're trying to get you to part with your cash. The social change agent is trying to get you to part with your values. All right? So they may actually, in their minds, be doing something good. They may be feeling like this is, I'm trying to make the world a better place. But at the same time, we have to realize what's behind the messages. So a social change agent might do this. Let's say they want you to have less kids. They may go to someone who's in movies. You can look this up if you want to. In the movie industry, and say, can we put these messages in these movies or these TV shows? And maybe if I want people to have less kids, I put messages in like, a leading actress finds out she's pregnant and how this is going to affect her career, but then later she finds out the test was negative, and she's so relieved, and it's like her husband's going, I'm so glad that the test was negative. And you might be thinking, well, this is just something interesting and fun to throw into the plot, or it's something that maybe there's people out there that really do have this happen to them. Or maybe you could think about the fact that there are foundations and organizations who feel that having kids is just the worst thing possible for Mother Earth. Okay, so we have to keep people from having too many kids. And then there's other things where you portray the idea that you got some plots where, the leading woman's in her mid or late 30s. She's held out for the perfect man, and suddenly the perfect man just comes along, and she's going to have everything she ever dreamt of. She has career. She has, the possibility of being able to have kids now, even though there's a very short window of opportunity there, but we don't want to talk biology, do we? She's going to have this wedding in Fiji on the beach, and it's going to be so fantastic, and her friends are miserable. They married men who weren't that good, and so on and so on. So, you see, this is where a social change agent is trying to get you to have different values, perhaps. Let's say you're a very traditional Muslim, Mormon, Catholic, fundamentalist Protestant, or Orthodox Jewish, and you believe that, kids are this blessing. And, that obviously could lead to, if one kid's a blessing, then maybe 6 kids is a wonderful blessing. And so when you get the social change agents coming in there and basically trying to convince you, not trying to say, not doing a rational argument like, from their perspective, saying, the world's overpopulated and we need to lower the birth rate, all these kinds of things that you would think would be the traditional methods of trying to get people to reconsider fertility decisions. Instead, they get you under the radar emotionally, little by little, in your entertainment, in your educational materials, even influencing religion, going in and trying to do seminars and maybe even getting people from certain religions that agree with you, even though they may be a minority within their religion, and then who are well respected and looked up to, and have them give messages, those kinds of things. it's, to me, that's more psychopathic. A psychopath might go to a person and he sees or she sees the perfect man or woman and they want to seduce them. Okay? That's a one-on-one situation. But they're going to use techniques. I know a woman who talks about how she seduces heterosexual women. And she thinks it's really cool. But she's told me all the strategies she uses to break down, especially conservative women. And that, this is something, when you see it on an interpersonal level, you're going, oh my gosh, this is horrible. People should. But psychopaths could do this, very well. And they can also do this on a societal level. That, find out what are the values the people have, find out what conflicting values, and this gets back to my training, find out what might be a value that they could that could justify the other one. Humans love to rationalize. So you have something that says here, for instance, I really love children, and you find a value like I want my children to have more than I did. So you sell the idea of, well, do you really want to have 3 kids? Why not just have 1 kid? And then you can have, your child, and you can have a better education for that child. You could have a better university, instead of your kids having to maybe start out with community college and then transfer into a regular state college in order to save money. Well, this to me is psychopathic, because you're not coming out there with a paper saying, look, here's advantages, disadvantages. No, you present it subtly. And that's the best way, because then people just eventually start adopting the views that their rational mind, the part of them that's okay, this is what my religion believes, this is how I feel about things, at this level, here's the advantages of having kids. But you get it subconsciously into the emotions, and that starts rewiring that stuff. So, and once you get it institutionalized, once it's the norm, then everyone works on each other. Where it's like, whoa, you've got 2 kids now, I guess you're happy, you've got your kids, suddenly, instead of so what do you want, you got 2 boys, I guess you're hoping for a girl next time. That was very traditional back in the 1950s, 60s. Heck, it's been traditional for thousands of years, but that has been rewired. And I would say that if you at least understand how psychopaths operate, then you can see how you can start noticing the messages. You start seeing things that maybe other people don't see, because they trust the messages. They trust the powers that be. They trust the influential, and so forth. And finally, it gets us into the idea of politics. You can't totally understand the political mind unless you understand the idea of a Machiavellian point of view. So, Machiavelli, and often Machiavellianism is listed as a trait of psychopathy, but not all psychopaths, not all Machiavellians are necessarily psychopathic. They may take a job in the State Department and realize, well, it's my duty to go out and follow the orders and accomplish a goal. So they become tools of psychopathic reasoning. But anyway, Machiavellianism says the ends justify the means. So in politics, basically it works like this. Let's say you do have a campaign in which you can at least make innuendo that your opponent is doing wrong. It's like, I remember there was a congressman, and this is back in the 1960s, and he knew that most people wouldn't understand the difference between, in those days, the difference between heterosexual and homosexual. in the sense that, most people had not really started identifying with the idea of heterosexuality, meaning that, straight or, boy meets girl, gets married, that sort of thing. And so, he started saying that his opponent was a flaming heterosexual. And the funny thing is, he won. But in reality, most people heard what they were like. Oh, hetero. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean he's gay? And in those days, they voted against him. Now, there's a saying that goes along with this. There's a saying it's kind of like, better to ask forgiveness than permission. Or, it's better to apologize after you win an election than to be the loser. Okay? Because people will forgive you. Okay? And so this is the way our politics are. And that's extremely, extremely psychopathic. There was, not making any diagnosis here, but just think about when Harry Reid said that, yeah, sure, I the idea was, the reporter said, well, you kind of misled people on, the idea that Mitt Romney hadn't, been honest on his taxes or paid taxes or something like that. And he just said, well, he didn't win, did he? Okay. So ultimately, it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission, or it's better to, point out something later, but at the election